The year is 1943. The world is burning with the biggest war ever fought. Millions of soldiers clash across Europe, Africa, and Asia. But not all those soldiers are men. For the first time in modern war, thousands of women wear military uniforms too. American women join the Women's Army Corps, flying planes and working in offices close to the fighting. British women serve as pilots, moving aircraft from factories to airfields through dangerous skies. French women fight in resistance groups, blowing up German supply trains and passing secret messages. These women believe they fight under the same rules of war as men, but unfortunately enough, many of them would soon find out they were wrong. Lieutenant Mary Collins never thought she would become a prisoner. As part of the American Women's Army Corps, she worked just miles behind the front lines in Italy, managing radio communications for advancing Allied forces. When German tanks broke through near Monte Cassino in a surprise attack, Mary and 4 other WAC officers were caught in the chaos. "Run!" her commander shouted as German soldiers surrounded their small headquarters. But there was nowhere to go. Women? In uniforms? The German captain seemed more surprised than angry when his men brought Mary's group to him. He spoke perfect English, looking them up and down slowly. How interesting. America sends its daughters to die in foreign mud. Something in his eyes made Mary's skin crawl. It wasn't just the look of an enemy capturing prisoners. There was something else there, something hungry. "We are military personnel," Mary said firmly, pointing to her Lieutenant Bars. "Under the Geneva Convention, we have rights as prisoners of war." The German captain smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "The Geneva Convention," he said slowly, "protects soldiers, not women playing at war." He turned to his men and spoke in German. Mary didn't understand the words, but she saw how the soldiers' eyes changed as they looked at her and the other women again. Later, she would remember this as the moment she first understood real fear. On the same day, 300 miles north in France, British Air Transport Auxiliary pilot Sarah Bennett was climbing from the wreckage of her Spitfire. She had been delivering the fighter plane to an airfield near Paris when German anti-aircraft guns found her. The plane was down, but Sarah was alive. She didn't stay free for long. German patrols found her hiding in a farmer's barn just before sunset. "Name, rank, and serial number," Sarah repeated as they questioned her. She wore a proper Royal Air Force uniform. She had identification. She had trained for this moment. The rules of war were clear. "An English Rose-flying killing machines," said the German officer in charge. He was older than the others, with cold eyes. "How perverse your country has become, sending its women to do men's work." He made a note in a small book, writing something that made him smile slightly. Then he looked up at Sarah again. "You will not be going to a regular prisoner camp, Fräulein Bennett. Your unusual situation requires special handling." Across France, Belgium, Italy, and later in Germany itself as Allied forces advanced, this scene played out dozens of times. American, British, and French women in military service falling into German hands. Each time, the pattern was the same: immediate separation from male prisoners, special classification, different processing. In a memo dated June 1943, found only after the war ended, German High Command issued special instructions. Female enemy combatants represent a unique category of prisoner. They are not to be processed through standard POW channels. Their status as women who have voluntarily abandoned normal feminine roles makes them subject to specialized protocols. These specialized protocols were written in cold language that hid terrible meaning. Another document, kept secret until 1995, instructed German officers: Western female military personnel are to be classified as morally compromised women who have surrendered the protections normally afforded to their sex. Their treatment should reflect this classification. By late 1943, the Germans had created an entire shadow system for handling captured Allied women. No Red Cross inspections, no prisoner exchanges, no oversight. while male prisoners went to established POW camps, where international rules were at least partly followed, captured women went somewhere else entirely. They put us in a separate truck. Mary Collins later told military investigators in a report that remained classified until 2006. The male prisoners were loaded onto regular transport. We were driven away in a different direction. I remember one of the German guards saying to another, "These ones go to the special facility," the way he smiled when he said it. I knew then that whatever waited for us would be worse than anything we had trained for. The Germans, with their love of records and categories, had created special processes just for female military captives. Their capture was just the first step into a nightmare that would remain largely hidden from history for decades. However, what most captured women didn't know was that their fate had been decided long before their capture. In a meeting at SS headquarters in 1942, officers from intelligence, medicine, and psychology had gathered to create what they called Protocol 27, specialized procedures for female military captives. The meeting's minutes, discovered decades later, revealed a chilling level of planning. "The female enemy soldier presents both a challenge and an opportunity," wrote SS Colonel Werner Haas. "Their presence on battlefields is an aberration we can exploit. Their capture allows us to study this Western perversion while simultaneously developing methods to break their unusually strong resistance." The Germans had been watching and planning for months before capturing their first female combatants. They had studied Allied recruitment materials, analyzed training procedures, and developed specific techniques designed to exploit what they saw as women's unique vulnerabilities. This wasn't just wartime cruelty, it was calculated science. The truck carrying Mary and the other American WAC officers drove through the night. Through the small window, she could see they were heading east, deeper into German-controlled territory. Away from the front lines, away from other prisoners, away from anyone who might enforce the rules of war. As dawn broke, the truck stopped at a facility with no markings or flags. It wasn't on any map. The guards opened the back doors. "Welcome to your new home, ladies," a German officer said in perfect English. "Your war is over, but I'm afraid your real troubles are just beginning." The first thing the Germans took from captured women soldiers was not their weapons or their information, it was their dignity. When Mary Collins and the other American women arrived at the unmarked building, they were immediately separated. Male prisoners went through a simple process: name, rank, number, and basic health check. The women faced something very different. Strip everything off. The order came from a German woman in a crisp uniform. She wasn't a nurse or a doctor. She was something else, an officer trained specially for handling female prisoners. The room was cold, with bright lights and concrete floors. 5 German guards, both men and women, stood watching. Mary looked at her fellow officers. They had been trained to give only name, rank, and number. Nothing in their training had prepared them for this. "We are military personnel," Mary said again, her voice shaking slightly. "Under the Geneva Convention." The German woman cut her off with a sharp laugh. "That agreement is for soldiers. You are women who have forgotten your place. Your processing will reflect that." She nodded to the guards, who stepped forward. "You will comply, or we will assist you." What happened next was called an examination in German records. But it wasn't medical care. It was the first step in breaking these women. They were forced to remove all clothing, standing naked under harsh lights as German officers walked around them, making comments about their bodies. Some took notes, others simply stared. A camera flashed repeatedly. "For identification," a German officer explained with a small smile. Years later, researchers would find these photographs not in military identification files, but in the private collections of camp commanders. They were trophies, not records. Sarah Bennett, the British pilot, faced similar treatment when she arrived at a facility near Paris. "The most shocking part was how organized it was," she later wrote in a diary kept hidden during her captivity. "This wasn't random cruelty. They had a system, a process. forms to fill out, special rooms set up just for women prisoners. They had been planning this. The examinations lasted hours. Women were measured, photographed from all angles, asked invasive questions about their personal lives. German doctors, mostly men, performed unnecessary physical checks, their hands lingering too long. All of this was recorded in clinical language in files marked Female Prisoner Processing Protocol. A document found after the war, written by the German High Command, explained the purpose. Western women who take military roles maintain psychological strength through identification with male soldiers. This identification must be systematically dismantled. Their status as females must be emphasized through processing designed to create shame and awareness of vulnerability. In simple terms, they wanted to make these women forget they were soldiers and remind them they were women who could be hurt in ways male prisoners couldn't. For French resistance women, the process was even worse. Without uniforms or military status, they were classified simply as female terrorists. Their processing included public humiliation in front of German troops, forced to stand naked in courtyards while officers lectured about women who betray their natural roles. Some had their heads shaved like other French civilians accused of helping the Allies. They took pictures of everything. A French ex-POW named Elise Dupont told Allied investigators after the war, "They made us pose, they made us stand in ways that..." Her testimony breaks off here in official records. The male officer taking her statement wrote, "Subject became too emotional to continue." What he really meant was, her description was too disturbing for him to write down. After processing, the women received different clothes than male prisoners. Not uniforms, but civilian dresses, often too small or too revealing. Nothing underneath. No proper shoes, just thin slippers. When they complained about the cold, guards laughed. "You want to be treated like soldiers?" a guard asked Mary Collins when she demanded proper POW treatment. "Soldiers endure hardship without complaint. Consider this your first test." That night, the temperature in the women's quarters dropped to near freezing. They huddled together for warmth, strangers becoming sisters through shared suffering. This process repeated at every facility where Allied women were held. German records show at least 15 specialized female detention centers operating by 1944. Each followed the same procedures, refined through horrible experience. Each was designed to break women in specific ways, different from men. A training manual for German guards, discovered in archives decades later, instructed, "Female prisoners require psychological conditioning before interrogation. Their sense of modesty and gender must be exploited. Create conditions where they must choose between dignity and cooperation. Document all responses for research purposes." That cold word, research, appears often in German records about female prisoners. They weren't just holding these women, they were studying them, learning what broke them, refining their methods. The Third Reich, with its obsession with proper gender roles, wanted to understand women who had stepped outside those roles by becoming soldiers. By the third day of captivity, many women began showing signs of the psychological breakdown the Germans sought. Some stopped speaking, others cried constantly. A few became angry, fighting guards and facing harsh punishment. The Germans noted all these reactions in their files, rating each woman's adjustment to female status. But something unexpected happened too, something the Germans hadn't planned for. The women began to resist in small ways. They formed tight bonds with each other. They created secret communication systems. They found ways to maintain dignity even in the most humiliating conditions. "They could take our clothes, our privacy, even our names," Sarah wrote in her hidden diary. "But they couldn't take who we really were. Each night, we whispered our ranks and units to each other. We reminded ourselves, we are soldiers. This is just another battlefield." This resistance infuriated their captors. German officers had expected Western women to break easily under these specialized techniques. When they didn't, the guards escalated their methods. The next phase would test these women's strength in ways even darker than before. As the first week of captivity ended, Mary Collins overheard two guards talking outside the women's quarters. One said something in German that made the other laugh. Mary had picked up enough German to understand the chilling words. The commander says if they still think they're soldiers after processing, it's time for real interrogation to begin. The women didn't know it yet, but processing had just been the beginning. The worst was yet to come. After 2 weeks in German hands, Mary Collins and the other captured women were moved again. They travelled at night in covered trucks, windows blacked out so they couldn't see where they were going. When the trucks finally stopped, they had arrived at a facility unlike any regular prison camp. There were no markings on the gates, no Red Cross visits, no contact with male prisoners or the outside world. "This is where you'll stay until the war ends," the commander told them as they were marched through heavy doors. "Or until you prove cooperative enough for better treatment." The building had once been a small hospital before the war. Now it served a different purpose, a place where the Germans could do things away from watching eyes. The facility near Frankfurt wasn't on any official maps. It wasn't listed in German prison records that Allied forces would later capture. It existed in a shadow world, created specially for women the Germans saw as difficult cases, those with military intelligence training or leadership positions. Similar secret sites operated across German-controlled territory, places where normal rules didn't apply. Sarah Bennett, the British pilot, was sent to a different facility near Paris. She described it in her hidden writings. "It looks almost normal from the outside, like an office building or small school. Inside, it's divided into sections, different rooms for different purposes, some for questioning, some for punishment, some for what they call special handling. The Germans are very organized about everything they do to us. They keep records, they have schedules. This isn't random cruelty. It is all organized." At these specialized sites, German intelligence officers implemented what their own documents called enhanced female interrogation protocols. In plain language, they used you-know-what as standard practice for questioning women prisoners. Unlike the public humiliation of processing, this phase happened behind closed doors, but with the full knowledge and approval of German leadership. "The first time they took me for night questioning, I thought it would be like the other sessions." Mary later testified in a report sealed by American authorities until 2001. "But they didn't take me to the regular interrogation room. I was brought to an officer's private quarters. There were 3 men waiting. One said, 'Now we'll see if an American woman soldier is as tough as she pretends to be.' What happened next?" The transcript notes that Mary stopped speaking for several minutes before continuing. German officers believed Western women would be particularly vulnerable to all this because of what they called bourgeois notions of honor and virtue. A training document told interrogators, "Female enemy personnel from Western nations maintained psychological resistance through identification as soldiers. This can be broken through methods emphasizing their status as women. Their cultural background makes them especially susceptible to shame and fear of moral compromise." Again, in more simple words but horrific, they thought they could break Western women by attacking not just their bodies, but their sense of themselves as good women. Elise from the French Resistance described how German officers used younger women to control older ones. "They would bring in the youngest girl from our group, just 19 she was. They would tell me either I answered their questions or they would make me watch what happened to her. What choice did I have? But the next day there would be new questions, new threats. It never ended." British SOE agent reports, kept secret for decades after the war, described night interrogations, where women were taken to officers' quarters rather than standard questioning rooms. What happened in those places was recorded in cold, clinical German notes that rated each technique for effectiveness. Some of these records were found after the war, but Allied authorities immediately classified them. They were considered too disturbing for public knowledge. German female guards often participated in these sessions, especially those from specialized SS units. These women had been selected and trained to deal with what Nazi ideology called gender traitors, women who had violated proper female roles by taking military positions. The female guards were sometimes more cruel than the men, seeing female prisoners as a disgrace to all women. The woman in charge of our section, Helga, would tell us daily that we deserved everything that happened, Sarah wrote. That real women stayed home and had babies for their country. That by putting on uniforms we had chosen to be treated like men, or worse than men. She would help hold us down. She would watch and take notes. Sometimes she seemed to enjoy it more than the male officers did. The Germans documented everything in precise detail. They created files on each woman, noting which approaches were most effective in breaking resistance. They conducted what they called comparative studies on women from different countries, testing whether American, British or French women responded differently to various forms of the things that happened to them. Some of these records were destroyed as Allied forces approached, but enough survived to reveal the nature of what happened. Most disturbing was how senior German leadership knew and approved of these methods. This wasn't just a few bad officers acting on their own. It was official policy, designed at high levels and implemented across all facilities holding female military prisoners. A memo from SS headquarters, dated September 1943, specifically authorized special measures for female combatants and requested regular reports on effectiveness of gender-specific techniques. In December 1944, as Allied forces advanced toward Germany, Heinrich Himmler personally ordered a reassessment of the female prisoner program. A meeting was convened in Berlin with officers from various detention facilities presenting their findings. Most unexpected was the report from Facility 9 near Frankfurt, wrote a German intelligence officer, whose memoirs were discovered in 1995. Their commanding officer reported complete failure with Soviet women pilots, but significant success with Americans and British. The French resistance women fell somewhere between. This directly contradicted findings from other facilities, leading to heated debate. The Germans had expected national characteristics to determine which women broke most easily. Instead, they discovered individual factors mattered more. Prior trauma, military training quality, and personal resilience predicted outcomes better than nationality. This discovery led to significant changes in procedures during the war's final months, with prisoners being categorized by psychological profile rather than military origin. But something the Germans hadn't expected happened in these terrible places. The women prisoners, despite everything done to break them, found ways to resist. They created secret support systems among themselves. They developed codes to communicate when guards weren't listening. They found small ways to maintain their identity as soldiers, even as everything was done to strip that identity away. At night, in whispers, we would recite our ranks and units to each other, Mary wrote in a journal she kept hidden in a crack in the wall. We would tell stories of our training, our service before capture. We reminded each other, we are soldiers first. What they do to our bodies doesn't change that. We are still fighting, just on a different battlefield now. This resistance took incredible courage. Each morning, women who had been taken away for questioning the night before would return bruised and broken. Others would help clean them up, sharing the small amounts of water they were given. They would whisper words of strength to each other. They would help those who couldn't stand or speak after what had been done to them. The Germans noticed this solidarity and tried to break it. They would offer better treatment to women who informed on others. They would give extra food or warmer clothes to those who cooperated. They would isolate women who seemed to be leaders, keeping them separate from the others. But these tactics rarely worked. There was an American wax sergeant, Sarah wrote, who they took every night for 2 weeks. When they brought her back, she couldn't even walk. But she never told them anything, not one word beyond her name and number. When they finally gave up on her, they threw her back in with us, thinking she was broken beyond repair. But that night, She whispered the Pledge of Allegiance to the others in her room. Still a soldier, still fighting. As 1944 progressed and Allied forces pushed closer to Germany, the treatment of women prisoners grew worse. The Germans began destroying records and moving prisoners deeper into German territory. They knew that what they had done to these women would be considered war crimes if discovered. Some women were transferred so many times that their own governments lost track of them entirely. For Mary, Sarah, Elise, and hundreds of other captured women, survival became the only victory possible. Each day alive was another battle won. Each act of small resistance was a triumph. They couldn't know if they would ever be freed or if anyone would ever know what had happened in these secret places. But they refused to surrender their core identity as soldiers, even as everything was done to destroy it. In April 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany, they began finding the secret facilities where female military personnel had been held. The liberating soldiers weren't prepared for what they discovered. Women in terrible condition, suffering not just from starvation like other prisoners, but from injuries and trauma that the male officers didn't know how to handle. Some couldn't speak at all. Others couldn't stop talking, words pouring out about what had been done to them. Lieutenant Mary Collins was among those liberated from a facility near Munich. When American soldiers broke down the doors, she weighed just 85 pounds. Her hair had turned white in places, though she was only 26 years old. "We're American WACs," she told the shocked young sergeant who found her group. "We're soldiers, like you." The sergeant later wrote in his report that he cried when she said those words. The joy of liberation quickly turned to something else. Within days, the women noticed how differently they were treated compared to male prisoners. Male POWs were celebrated, given immediate medical care, and prepped for happy homecoming stories. The women were handled cautiously, separated from other freed prisoners, and questioned by officers who often seemed uncomfortable with what they were hearing. "They took us to a different hospital," Sarah Bennett wrote in the final pages of her hidden diary. "No photographers came to take our pictures like they did with the men. No newspaper reporters asked for our stories. A colonel told us certain parts of our experience were classified, and we shouldn't talk about them, ever, to anyone." At these special hospitals, military intelligence officers conducted debriefings unlike anything male prisoners went through. Women were questioned for days, often by male officers with no training in handling trauma victims. The questions focused strangely, not just on military information they might have, but on exactly what had been done to them. Every detail was recorded, every horror carefully documented. Then the files were stamped top secret and locked away. "The major interviewing me couldn't look me in the eye," Elise from the French resistance later told a researcher. "He asked questions reading from a paper. When I described what happened during the night interrogations, his hand shook so badly he spilled his coffee. At the end, he handed me more papers to sign. One was a regular military debriefing form, the other was different. It said I agreed never to share certain experiences with anyone, not even doctors or family. They said it was for national security. These secrecy agreements were standard for women prisoners, but not for men. A recently discovered memo from American military intelligence explained why. Detailed accounts of specialized enemy treatment of female military personnel could cause serious public relations issues and impact future recruitment of women. These experiences, while regrettable, do not serve any intelligence purpose and should be sealed. In simple terms, what happened to these women would make the public angry and might stop other women from joining the military in the future, so their stories needed to disappear. When the women finally returned home, they found a world eager to forget the uglier parts of war. Parades welcomed male soldiers home as heroes. Newspapers celebrated victory. Everyone wanted happy stories, not dark truths. The women who had endured the worst treatment often received the least recognition. "My brother came home with a Purple Heart and told everyone about the bullet that hit him," Mary Collins wrote in a letter found after her death in 1988. "I came home with scars nobody could see and nightmares nobody wanted to hear about." When I tried to tell my mother what really happened, she said, "It's better not to dwell on unpleasant things, dear." So I stopped talking about it. We all did. The medical treatment these women received back home made things worse, not better. Male doctors in military hospitals had no understanding of their unique trauma. Women suffering from what we now call PTSD were diagnosed with female hysteria or nervous conditions. Their physical problems from what happened were often ignored or misdiagnosed. The doctor asked about my nightmares and panic attacks. Sarah wrote in 1946. When I started explaining what caused them, he stopped me and said, "That's not relevant to your treatment, Miss Bennett." He prescribed pills to help me sleep and suggested I focus on more feminine pursuits to take my mind off dwelling on the past. As if I could just forget. As these women tried to rebuild their lives, they discovered their own governments were actively erasing their stories. Military records about female POWs were heavily edited. Reports mentioning the terrible things that happened were classified at higher levels than atomic research. When books about the war were written, their experiences were left out entirely. A memo from British intelligence in 1947, declassified only in 2010, instructed, "References to specialized enemy treatment of female personnel must be removed from all public records. Such information serves no historical purpose and could damage public morale and international relations in the post-war period." Many of the women themselves kept silent, not just because of official secret acts they had signed, but because the world didn't want to hear. Some tried to tell their stories only to be called liars or attention seekers. Others found that people simply couldn't believe what they described. The systematic nature of what happened was so horrible that many preferred to think it was exaggerated. People would say, "But the Germans were civilized enemies, not like the Japanese," Mary wrote. "They had this idea that Europeans wouldn't do such things." When I tried to explain it wasn't just a few bad officers, but an actual system with written procedures, they would change the subject. Even other veterans didn't want to hear it. It was easier to believe we were making it up or crazy. The silence lasted decades. Many women went to their graves without ever speaking the full truth, even to their families. Sarah Bennett married in 1947 but never had children. "I couldn't bear to be touched for years," she wrote to a former fellow prisoner in 1952. "My husband thinks it's because of some physical problem. I've never told him the real reason. How could I? We're all still keeping the secrets they told us to keep." It wasn't until the 1980s that historians began to uncover what had happened. As wartime records were slowly declassified, researchers started finding disturbing patterns in scattered documents. References to specialized facilities for female prisoners, medical reports with certain sections completely blacked out, gaps in prisoner transfer records where women's names should have been. In 1985, Professor Helen Richards began interviewing surviving women who had been military prisoners. At first, few would talk to her. Then slowly, as they reached their 60 seconds and 70 seconds, some began to share their stories. They were tired of carrying the burden alone, tired of the official silence. They wanted the truth known before they died. "It wasn't just what the Germans did to us," Elise told Richards in an interview recorded in 1987. "It was what our own people did after. They told us to forget. They hid our reports. They treated us like we had done something shameful by surviving. We were betrayed twice, first by our captors, then by our countries." In 1995, a breakthrough came when a cache of German documents was discovered in a former Stasi archive in East Berlin. These included training manuals for handling female prisoners and reports evaluating different interrogation methods. The clinical language couldn't hide the horror of what they described. Finally, there was proof that the women's stories were true. But even with this evidence, official recognition came slowly. The first formal acknowledgement didn't come until 2001, when the American government declassified selected files about women POWs. A small ceremony honored surviving women now in their 82nds. No press was invited, no public statement was made, just a quiet recognition of a truth hidden for half a century. Mary Collins didn't live to see that day. She died in 1988, her story still largely untold. But she left behind letters and journals hidden in her attic, discovered by a niece cleaning out her house. In one of the last entries she wrote, "Someday someone will want to know what really happened to us. Someday people will be ready to hear the truth. I write this for that day, though I don't expect to see it. Some burdens you carry your whole life, hoping the next generation won't have to." The stories of Mary, Sarah, and Elise illuminate a dark corner of history that almost disappeared forever. Their courage wasn't just on battlefields or in the skies, it continued through years of captivity and decades of imposed silence afterward. What makes these women extraordinary isn't just what they endured, but how they resisted forming bonds that sustained them through unimaginable darkness, whispering their ranks at night to remember who they truly were. This documentary serves as both historical record and long overdue recognition. Through declassified documents and survivors' testimonies, we've pieced together what governments tried to erase. Their legacy lives on in expanded protections for women in uniform today. More importantly, by honoring their stories, painful as they may be, you ensure these women are no longer casualties of historical erasure. Even though some histories challenge us, all deserve to be told. Thank you for remembering them. In memory of the women of the Women's Army Corps, Air Transport Auxiliary, and French resistance who served in World War II. For those who survived captivity only to be silenced. For those whose stories remained classified until death. For Mary, Sarah, Elise, and hundreds like them whose courage continued long after the war ended. May their untold sacrifice finally be acknowledged. 1943 to 2025. From secrecy to history.